Hi there, welcome to an important focused video on how childhood and traumatic experiences, events can link on to the future and how toxic friendships, certain environments behind closed doors where there could be mistreatment and harmful factors by the hands of someone else, how it can be a chain event that whilst a person may have PTSD present time and it links back to a previous traumatic event, there could well be an underlying factor that something that happened further back may link on or be the original, the source. So just want to say, a bit of a trigger warning with what I'm talking about in general today. If it does get too much, you're more than welcome to pause the video, take time if you need to click off, you do whatever is most comfortable for you, okay? So the order of how it will be done today is childhood, a particular traumatic experience, causes, effects, then how it links on down the line, the delayed effects at times, things resurfacing in the future. Whilst PTSD can be an invisible struggle and complex PTSD can be invisible, the feelings are well known, auditory senses are well heard and understood by, the survivor. But it's important to acknowledge at times the survivor could be dealing with invisible issues, not knowing where it stems from, not knowing why things are the way they are in the moment, not feeling quite like themselves, or that they're living in third person, seeing themselves from afar on autopilot, moments of push-pull dynamics. What's focused on today can explain how friendships and relationships can be troublesome and difficult for people. And even when moving on from one significant other to another, and as time progresses, the feeling of being stuck, parts of that can link back to childhood. So let's begin with that stage to begin with, okay? As said, if it does get too much, you can always pause the video, take a break. Brief examples of traumatic experiences during childhood, if we're specifically focusing in on friendships and relationship troubles in the future and being indirectly, inadvertently naive or vulnerable and open to future maltreatment, mistreatment by the hands of another bad person or controlling individual. It stems back to being a young, impressionable individual brought into this world. At first, not quite knowing what's right from what's wrong. That primary stage around primary caregivers, primary forms of attachment being formed with time, forged slowly, and normally, hopefully, for the better, in a positive environment around caring individuals, parents, and maybe friends of friends. Stable upbringing can help greatly down the line, but what happens if trust is misused, misplaced? What if lines are blurred? Is the young, impressionable individual going to know about it at the time? Likely not. It could be psychological. Words, sayings, lines, almost like a form of bullying, psychological bullying. Insults, swearing, raise of voice, aggression in voice, verbally shouted at, dismissed, neglected. That can be forms of mistreatment, which down the line can impact a person, as in not being able to speak out or share how they feel because of the consequences from the early days, but they may not know that the link has been established. When things traumatic, one singular event could be considered PTSD, but one deep, impactful event could be a crossover with complex PTSD if it does down the line lead to feelings of hopelessness or feeling broken or there's something wrong, more than inner hatred upon oneself, some form of self-loathing. In other ways, could be when trying to form a new friendship relationship, to be close, if intimacy is a problem, but not quite knowing why there's a barrier, why it feels like you can't reach in, can't accept intimacy, can't accept warmth, holding at arm's length physically or psychologically. It could well stem back to a traumatic event, which could be months ago, years ago, but it could also stem back to a more complex situation during childhood in which forms of intimacy was broken, trust was misplaced. The verbal side, poor communication and poor verbal treatment can lead to a person's self-esteem being impacted, their worth within the world being impacted, how they see themselves and even others around, what they can and what they can't do can be impacted. But the deeper parts, where such as physical, and I've got to be careful with wording because I'm sure people will know and think of examples themselves, but like with YouTube guidelines, if in a situation you had a primary caregiver, a parent, a family member, people you're supposed to look up to and have trust within, where you could lower your guard, you could be somewhat vulnerable emotionally, physically, and others around would respect that personal space, would respect boundaries, would be patient, understanding, it'd be non-intrusive, a healthy environment with privacy given, with listening and understanding provided. When those core elements are ripped away or become fragmented and in a way corrupted, to the sufferer, they may not know about it. When things can become corrupted physically, that could be, beside the verbal side, more physical, a physical presence without the consent and in inappropriate ways. Whether that be a one-time event, which is bad enough and traumatic enough, or if it be on a few occasions, regular, or here and there, but spread out with some time. When it happens at a younger age, because the body and mind hasn't fully developed and it's still going through the concrete pre-operational stages of attachment, as in learning and communicating, being around familiar faces and a familiar environment, there's a level of routine built within that. There's a level of stability normally. There's a level of learning. But if taught or learned the wrong things, how they perceive the world and what they do and how they act can be impacted. If brought up in a troublesome environment, maybe on the sideline example, some kind of criminal world, some kind of criminal environment, and brought through that, that might be all they know because that's what they've been taught, that it is okay to rob, it is okay to be threatening, it is okay to raise one's voice, being taught the wrong stuff and internalizing it because of that primary attachment and that learning and that trust being built, listening to the words, it being instilled and drilled within the mind. That's all they know. That's an unhealthy situation, verbally speaking. You could consider it unhealthy indoctrination. So when it comes to something more physical, a touch, a presence, and it's another person who may be of a similar age or older, and it's someone related, for example, when it comes to inappropriate behavior, when it comes to innocence being stolen, taken away, the survivor may not see or feel like that at the time because it's so early on in life. If they're still learning, they may not know that it's unacceptable. They may just see it as a normal thing, an activity. You've got to take in mind that these inappropriate acts don't always take place immediately. There may be a rapport built between two individuals, laughing and joking, being kind, being nice, being patient and welcoming, leading the survivor, sufferer at the time, into a false sense of security and safety, whether that be brushing hair, whether that be a tap on the back and saying it's okay, it's fine, treating it like some kind of game, like hide and seek. Blurred lines in a twisted, manipulated way. The other person knows exactly what they're doing. They should know better. But how they're acting, using it against someone who may not be aware, who may not know the situation. So by creating that bond, creating that pattern, that routine, treating it like it's all normal when it is done, when an action is performed, when there is maltreatment, when there is a form of physicality, the other person won't resist and accept. Lines can be blurred if it's treated as normal or some kind of game. The other person on the receiving end may react as if they're laughing or joking. Sometimes it can be a defense mechanism because the brain doesn't know how to process or cope, and that can happen later on in life as well. A nervous laughter. They're not actually having fun. It's not a good time, but deep down, they're trying to play it off like they're not harmed, they're not bothered. To others that may not be as aware or as developed, if it's so early on in life, it can lead to just acceptance. And that's what the dangerous part is. Whether it be really early and it's simple acceptance with no resistance, or if it's at a slightly older age, but not that old, and there was a form of resistance, or the sufferer knew or felt that something wasn't quite right or it wasn't quite normal. Maybe they couldn't quite put the finger on it, or at first they felt something isn't right, the gut feeling, the instincts, but then they were convinced. There was a form of control, there was a form of manipulation in words and emotional blackmail, as in convincing and persuasive language, as in what's being done, what's going to happen is fine, it'll be safe, no need to worry. Being convinced, being deceived, all forms of manipulation, which starts verbally, then can proceed on physically. And at the end, there may be a level of acceptance in the moment, whether that be conceding, giving in, because there's no choice, because there's no escape, that's how it feels, because they've been convinced it is fine and okay. And that level of acceptance can be a symptom, and it can cross over in the future when it comes to coming across maybe a future relationship or a future friendship where they accept, they connect, and it goes from one thing to another. And then when bad things do happen, there is a level of acceptance and maybe less resistance because of what happened early on at the start, childhood, because it was normal then, or at least it felt, or they were convinced it was normal then. If it happens again in the future, it's the same thing. But the reality is, it's not normal, and it's not acceptable, and it's not good. But in certain circumstances, when that's all a person knows, what else are they supposed to think or feel? And that's why intervention is needed, or key support people around, genuine people that can provide perspective. Now, when you do have a singular traumatic event or a prolonged exposure to trauma and mistreatment, the feelings, the symptoms, and the effects may not be known or truly felt at that time because of the age a person is. But as they grow up and their mind and body develops, how they function and how they react, they may notice something isn't quite right, or Why are they acting or feeling different compared to everyone else around? What's going on inside of the body? Maybe not feeling quite yourself, or not feeling inside of you is normal, whether that be physical, whether that be psychological, or it could be external, as in how you act and react. If a person flinches, if a person tenses their muscles, if their heart starts racing, if they become a little breathless, if there was signs of a panic attack here and there, these little crossovers could link back to untreated trauma, undiagnosed trauma from the past, unknown of. So that could come in place when it's physically or psychologically felt, and then the person questions it themselves, whether they reach out, whether someone questions them, whether there's a form of opening up or intervention. Or it could be as a matter of going through high school, going through college, and certain classes where you're taught things and what you read online, providing it's the right stuff, learning about your own body, learning about your own mind and what's right and what's wrong, then it may trigger a memory. When we talk about triggers, it could be an environmental influence. It could be some kind of factor around stimuli. It's stimulating some kind of memory node within, some kind of sense, touch, taste, feel, hearing, eyesight, smell, which reminds you of the past. A certain smell, a certain sound could have been present at the time when a traumatic event was taking place. For example, if an individual was out and about and then they heard a song being played, or they heard a radio playing a song, they suddenly got really tense or started to panic, or they felt like they were going to throw up. But in the moment, they weren't too sure as to why. And then through thinking or piecing it all together, or slowly down the line retracing or questioning people about, as in, do you know of anything, or being questioned yourself if there was a form of therapy or intervention, linking it back to a possible childhood trauma in which there was a form of mistreatment, prolonged exposure to it, or one singular impactful event when a traumatic event took place. For example, a form of physicality, an example of intimacy in the wrong way, in an inappropriate, not normal way. If for some reason at the time of when it was taking place, if there was a perfume, a spray, a scent in the air, and then the next time you smell that similar or same scent when you're older, more grown up, indirectly, invisibly, subconsciously or unconsciously, it might trigger that memory like a photograph from when it was last experienced. Or with sound, if there was a certain track, music playing at the time back then, during childhood when an event was taking place, the next time they hear it, or at times on occasions when they hear it, they react badly to it. They themselves are thinking, why does this song make me so emotional? Why does this moment make me so tense? Why does this scent in the air, or this scent upon a friend or a person who I'm close to, why does it trigger me? In the moment, they may not know. Other people around may be perplexed as well. But it's that possibility that because it links to the early days. So there can be certain invisible signs and red flags, as in triggering a memory, a core memory from the past, which wasn't dealt with or sorted, because with it happening at such an early age, there may have not been time to question it, with being busy, with going through education and doing other stuff in between, with it being early on where the body and mind isn't fully developed, so it's not going to protest the same way, it's not going to show that resistance, it's not going to question or step up to whatever. There is still always that occasion that some, depending slightly on the age, could resist or say, I don't want to play this game, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that anymore. Whether they know themselves truly as to why they don't want to, it could be an instinctive or gut feeling as to no. No is no. But because the other person could be overpowering in presence, authority, age dynamics, and so on, that negative, impactful influence and power shift can create a hierarchy, and it can create a level of intimidation in which the one on the receiving end is left with no choice but to just accept, because the power dynamics. It could be an influencer effect, that if it's a familiar face doing inappropriate stuff, but because they're much older and the other person is much younger, it is a form of learning and teaching and bonding at first naturally, or that's how it's perceived, reminding them of that persuasive language, manipulation, and then that sufferer looking up and thinking, because of who they are, they must know best. They must know what's best and what is right. Even that can apply later on in life, when research groups studies were done where a person could be in a room that doesn't know the answer to something, or they may know the answer to it, like a mathematical question. Other people about that appear as in presence, physicality, how they dress, how they look, how they sound, how they speak, appearing to look more intelligent and more knowledgeable, and how they answer and respond quick, creating that psychological influencing effect that because of the way they are, they must be right. They must know better. They must know more than what I do. Even if you knew the correct answer, you may follow in the direction which other people do, who could be wrong about something. What they say, what they think, what they do, they could be wrong about it. You follow in the same footsteps because that influence has convinced you that whatever you're thinking or feeling is wrong, and they know best. If that can happen during adulthood, it can certainly happen during childhood, when less developed, less progress has been made, and still in that early bonding stage with connecting with people around within the right reasons. If it's mistreated, misused, taken advantage of, a person of a higher authority, presence, power, age dynamic could misuse that. It could happen where a familiar face, a close individual, crosses the lines of a similar age as well. But because of persuasive language or forms of physicality, there can still be a level of force to do it against a person's will. And there could be lines and threatening language to keep the person silent. In a situation like that, and it can cross over with where it's more invisible and not known, untreated, neglected in a way, the individual not processing it or dealing with it, delayed reactions, delayed effects, and then later down the line it spills out in different ways. And if enough time has passed by, the person may have forgotten it, tried pushing it under the rug, tried pushing it back into their subconscious or more so unconscious mind to lock it away. Self-defense mechanisms of the mind can, purposely push horrible thoughts and feelings really deep back to the back of the mind to try and forget about it, meaning it's not dealt with, it's not resolved, it's just put on hold. In the moment, it feels like there's a form of self-protection and safety from the darkness, but where it's prolonged and not dealt with, it can become more complex with time, and like pressure that builds as something is trapped, air is trapped, liquid, it bubbles, it builds, it gets bigger, the feelings can get more intense. Then when dealing with it or having no choice but to face it, can be all at once, like a giant flood. Whereas if it's dealt with early on and managed, it's like the equivalent of an infection. You deal with an infection quickly, it won't spread as much through the body. If left unsupervised and not treated, it could pass through the body, it could take over more, and then it means there's more treatment, takes more time to fix the situation, more so to heal the wound. This trauma can be considered as a psychological wound, which is left open and exposed. It might be covered by some kind of self-defense mechanism, but it's still exposed. It could be repressed deep into the core of the mind, the memories. And whilst it seems like it's been forgotten or kept at bay, if at any point or time there is a stimuli, there is a trigger which activates a memory from the past associated with one of the senses: touch, feeling, hearing, sound, scent, smell, vision. It brings you back to that day where you once were, maybe in a compromising position, misuse of power, misuse of trust being broken, bonds and genuine attachment being torn apart. And with time, a person can learn about it or maybe pick up on it, but maybe not immediately, because the first stages will be delayed if the situation has been repressed or forgotten about. Delayed intensifies and then felt, dealing with the uncertainty and the unknown of not knowing why it feels like that, why the body's reacting, why the feeling of anxiousness at certain times, why the feeling of maybe trouble in communicating, the trouble of getting close to someone, struggling with that, not being able to look past certain emotions and feelings, as in foreseeing a future with a group of friends or foreseeing a future with a significant other, is an invisible blockage and barrier. And the thing is, if some people are very unfortunate to experience another traumatic event, which at an older age they're fully aware of, or definitely become more aware of shortly after, a traumatic event in itself can be damaging and can have lasting effects depending on how it's dealt with and treated, and if anything else happens in between, micro events and moments. But if it happened then, if it happened again after, or it felt like for a person that may not know of the past, but more the present and onwards, if there's ever a time of self-reflection where it feels like, why am I always around bad influences? Why do I always find the wrong people in life? Why is everyone like this? It can create that feeling, that realization to them that everyone that they meet and get close to will only hurt them physically, emotionally, or both at some point. And for what they've gone through up to a certain point, that could well be true, and that's very unfortunate. That feeling of it could happen again and again and again is a natural response and an understanding to their situation and trying to deal with it. If that's all they know and that's all they experience and it's not going to change, or at least that's how it feels like, what's the point trying anymore? That can lead to retracting in being outwards, retracting in intimacy, pulling away. And even if there was a time or a moment where trying to get close to someone, there's that barrier, partially because you don't want history to repeat itself. But what if history truly dated back much earlier on than the person expected? An individual, a survivor, could say a previous traumatic event, what they went through, if it was a relationship type trauma, a domestic situation, in the presence of a controlling, a bad individual, forms of physicality, psychological, mental, daily exposure to unpleasant, poor treatment, and so on, that can have a wearing effect on the sufferer, survivor. And if at any point they manage to break free, escape, get away one way or another, they get away from the environment, they get away from the person, but the feelings, the damage has been done, and that carries on over as like an invisible weight, which they may be aware of or become aware of when seeking help or forms of treatment. Eventually become aware that it's present, it's known, and it's a problem. It makes everything difficult. It can make daily life difficult. It can lead to overwhelm, it can lead to stress, it can lead to negative reactions and other forms of communication, even slight disagreements, as feeling like it's a much intense moment, or the feeling of, if there was a disagreement or temporarily parting ways for a few minutes or not replying, responding back immediately, could feel like an ultimate loss to them. Going into panic or survival mode, fawn mode, to please the other individual, to do whatever, to bridge that gap. Whether the other person acts appropriately or takes advantage of that, that can be its own issues. But retracing back, feeling of a domino effect from one poor relationship to another and maybe another. Why does it feel like going from one wrong person to another? Invisibly, subconsciously, it could come down to that feeling of familiarity, whether it's in the moment or upon later reflection. Being around a bad person compared to being around a good person is a night and day difference. However, there can be intense negative side effects and feelings when around a good person. That may not make much sense, and to the good individual, the one that's meaningful and being genuine, may find it hard to comprehend themselves. It's because when in a secure attachment, when in a more free, open, understanding, patient connection with someone, where there are core values in placed naturally, such as security, reassurance, being present, being punctual, being understanding, remembering them and what they say and do, understanding the importance behind it, believing in them when they talk about things and maybe their limitations or their past. When all those needs, those secret needs, are met for that survivor, it can create intense worry and panic. The closer that they get to someone, the more fear that they feel. That in the early days of meeting another person, there may be a wall. There may be feeling tense, nervous, shy, scared, because understandably, what's happened previous could happen again. So it's very natural to have a very high wall built around you, metaphorically, your heart, your mind, your overall body and presence. Physically or digitally, it can happen. Being in the presence of a new person, a new stimuli, can trigger sensors in the body. High alert, checking for any threats, any dangers within that person, checking for red flags. And when it gets to a point where there's a bit of a rapport, there's a bit of safety, but still holding that guard up, if ever there comes a point where that wall can lower, a person can be disarmed, it may trigger an invisible memory to childhood, when they were in that place of being convinced or naturally swayed in a direction that everything's fine, calm, relaxed, no need to worry. Could invisibly trigger it, which they aren't even aware of. They may link or associate it to just a previous traumatic event, but not a possible childhood traumatic event, which was similar, if not worse, in comparison. If they're not quite sure, though, where it comes from, they may shake it off or just deal with it and fight through. If it's something that they want, if it's meaningful to them, they may push through and try with a person or friendship or relationship and get closer, build a level of trust, build a level of understanding and open up more, a level of vulnerability sharing. But when all those core factors and needs are met, and it's shown in consistency, frequency, and depth, whether that be psychological, physical, or both, when plans are suggested, when it gets real, when it feels like it's become official, there may be a label or a tag associated with two individuals, that survivor feels like it's too good to be true. They may back off, they may freeze, they may run away as a form of self-protection. And on the outside, it might not make sense at first. How can a person run away from something that is so good for them naturally and good for the other person? And if it's meant to be and under the circumstances, how can it all go so wrong when it's all so right? How can a person feel so panicky and worried and scared and feeling a loss of control when at the same time they may feel that that person is right for them? How can you have such strong negatives met with such strong positives? An extreme high with an extreme low all occurring at the same time. That in itself can be a recipe for, being overwhelmed, exposure, not knowing how to really react or cope. But when broken down, the reason why it's difficult dealing strong positives with strong negatives is because it's partially to do with the past, a previous traumatic event, a previous relationship maybe, and possibly previous childhood trauma, all battling against a current situation which is deemed as the light, darkness met with light. And the survivor that may have been in darkness for some time, when coming out of that darkness, exposed to the light, it can be intense, the unknown, not used to it. And when you're not used to something, just like with a routine or a pattern, when it changes, you question it. When something good happens, even people that may not have PTSD, when something good happens in life, if you're not used to it, or you might be unlucky, then you might question, right, what's the catch? What's going to happen? Something positive happens, and then what? It's going to be replaced with a negative. A positive then met with a more extreme negative. Is it worth chancing it? The body, the mind, that cautiousness, it's like a self-defense mechanism, picking up on potential threats, traps, that feeling of, whilst an individual could be nice, caring, thoughtful, and all of that, all positives, they're only acting that way so they can get closer and you get closer. And then down the line, behind closed doors, they show their real, true self. That can be an internal thought or a humming feeling within, a feeling of dread and worry that on the surface level, this kindness is a mask, because what's beneath it is a monster. And no matter how nice and kind they may be and how they make you feel, it's dealing with the what-ifs. The what-ifs, although no guarantee and maybe not enough evidence, take over the body and mind simply because it does not want to go back to a place it once was perceived in and went through. The individual themselves, they don't want to go back to the past. Invisibly, the body-mind, slowly catching up and delayed, may even be considering childhood, not wanting to relive that. But the conscious mind hasn't quite caught up to that understanding that that might be what the barrier and blockade is, along with a previous traumatic event some months, years ago, but on top, a more complex, deep-rooted problem at the very beginning of life. In some circumstances, a deep-rooted issue like that can inadvertently, indirectly link on, unfortunately, to people being the wrong crowds of individuals, and that being repeated, that behavior on and again. A person could even question themselves and say, why do I keep doing this to myself? Or the self-belief of self-blame, all this bad stuff that happens must be because of me, or all these bad, dangerous people, I'm to blame because I hang around them, I get too close to them. A person's internal thoughts could get to a form of burnout where if they were fighting against light and dark and they eventually saw the light in someone and actually genuinely felt it for real, they looked past the catch, they looked past the trap because they just didn't see that. They actually felt truly comfortable and calm. When they finally do get close to someone like that, the feelings become more real, the connection becomes more real, the closeness, the possibilities, the hopes, the wishes. Then there can be an extreme panic. There can be a vulnerability hangover, whether that be certain feelings and thoughts shared and then being scared and worried that they overshared too much, and panic that the other person that's listening will find that too much and run a mile, thinking, I shouldn't have said this or that. What are they going to think of me? Are they going to think less of me? Are they going to react badly? If that's overcome and the other person remains present physically and isn't absent, reinforces it to the survivor that things are okay and it's fine. However, there can still be barriers despite going through all that, fighting one's own demons, fighting through all the barriers and invisible ones to get so far into a connection with someone, and yet there is still a massive drop-off which could cause a freeze response. And that's when an individual has become so comfortable, so relaxed around a particular person that they feel and know that they're good for each other, it triggers a possible link to the past, whether that be childhood or crossing on over into a previous traumatic event or both. If a person hasn't truly dealt with the past, dealt with issues and struggles because they couldn't, they didn't know how to, they didn't have the resources or access, or they were completely unaware of it. If it happened really early on in life, obviously it's going to be more intense when dealing with it for the very first time when it's built up after so long. And for some that may have coped and been aware that there are problems, aware but keeping it at bay, thinking that's what's best, but it doesn't truly fix the situation and it crosses over and gets in the way of a relationship, dealing with both and it overlapping, not ideal for them likely. But ultimately, what's important is in the moment when safe and secure, that freeze response, because they're so relaxed now, their defense mechanism has been lowered. Their wall has been lowered. Any darkness that was suppressed before, any bad thoughts and feelings and trauma that was unresolved and held back, because that defense barrier has now come down, everything can come through and flood to more so the conscious mind, or first the subconscious mind. So an individual had a really nice day, a great time with someone out in public or digitally online. Both say good night, go to sleep. It seems perfect and fine. Nice, comfortable for the first time ever in life. Feeling safe, feeling secure, and not worrying what the next day may bring. Being confident that the next day will be just as good as the day before, and the person that you met this morning will be the same the next day. That level of stability and security, reassurance, all the positives. Yet they wake up completely different. It feels like everything has changed. For the other person, they think everything's normal and fine until they realize that there is an absence, there is a deafening silence. For the survivor sufferer, how can they wake up the next day and everything has changed? Feeling being in a different body, a different mind, any flashbacks, all of a sudden intrusive thoughts, intrusive feelings, all coming back, which they've not dealt with, or some stuff they've never known of before. Other situations where they may know of the past, but didn't quite understand the significance or the true extent of damage that it can cause, and how it can link and overlap with future things and present stuff too. As said, if a person's very comfortable and their defense mechanism has been relaxed, that's good for them. That's a big positive. But anything that's been pushed into the darkness and forgotten or hidden is coming out, flooding out, leaking out, because there's nothing holding it back anymore. So, whilst things get better for them, and in a way for the other person, things also get significantly worse. How can such a positive, good time and moment lead to such an extreme negative drop-off hours later, days later? It's like a hangover, a delayed effect to even more delayed issues previous. And depending on the setting and who's present and about, if there's no intervention immediately to catch the fall, it can make things a little bit more tricky and make it harder for the survivor in dealing with it themselves and picking up all the pieces, figuring out why today feels different, why one's thoughts and feelings to the other person feels skewered and blurry, and there's intense trust issues or intense flashbacks and worries and concern. Why are you anxious around them when they made you feel great? What's changed so drastic? There's a possibility that nothing bad has actually happened between one another. Maybe deep down, they may say to the other person's face that it's not because of you, it's because of one's own internal battle going on within, which has heated up unexpectedly because as the defences have lowered, a siege has been laid upon the castle, breaking through the castle gate, and a war going on inside. That's what can happen, and it is unfortunate. If things have been treated or dealt with previous, there may be less chances of some kind of hangover and induced delayed effects. And that's why, when linking it back to childhood trauma, depending on how that was treated and dealt with, if unresolved or not known of at the time, that can be pushed away at the very back because it's the oldest thing to happen. And depending on how the sufferer, whether they processed, whether they knew what was happening at the time, or learned about it indirectly over time, then it floods and it rushes to the forefront. And the night and day difference literally is because when the person goes to sleep relaxed, self-defense mechanisms are lowered, and when during sleep, because of the levels in the body, dream state analysis, rapid eye movement, and the person's settling down, relaxing and dreaming, maybe it's positive first, and then suddenly, because the subconscious mind opens up during nighttime and sleep, if all those dark, negative, repressed thoughts, feelings and trauma was locked away in the unconscious mind, once the barrier is lowered, the defense mechanisms are lowered, then they'll come into the subconscious mind like a tunnel from one to another. And with those negative things being in the subconscious mind, when the person is asleep and the subconscious mind is activated, that's when possible intrusive thoughts kick in. Deep-rooted fear, feelings of abandonment, deep-rooted fear of mistrust, misuse, disrespect, verbal, physical harm, innocence stripped. Those subconscious thoughts can generate dreams when asleep. Those dreams can become nightmares, can become flashbacks to what they never knew of or forgot about, and then it comes all back clearly and so vivid, like they're reliving it in the moment. They may even get hallucinations where they see it in the room, they hear it about. It's not really there, but to them it's real. Reliving it all, reprocessing everything, reintroduced to something that they went through in the past. That could cross over and link in with a previous traumatic event from a few months or years back. It could be a double crossover, really intensifying the situation. And at times previous, there may have been like a snapshot memory of that, but they just didn't know. Feelings of uneasiness, feelings of self-blame, feelings of, as you know, triggering as it may sound, feeling disgusted within oneself, but not quite knowing why. Somehow it links back to the very, very early days and not always linking back to the last, if it did happen, traumatic event. That's not to say the last traumatic event isn't significant. All are important, but they can be very different from one another, because complex post-traumatic stress disorder is different to PTSD, more deep-rooted, more prolonged, more dragged out, more intensive. The control, the damage, the harm, the disrespects and all of that. longer term, longer exposure. So the effects and dealing with it and recovery is longer too. But it's still possible to heal. It's not always about fixing, more so about healing. When others people are about, if they can help or support, it's not about fixing or taking over. It's just about supporting, holding them up when they feel weak, catching them if they fall or slip, have a wobble, bringing back a level of reassurance and certainty. But that has to happen at a particular time when the struggling individual has reached a point of being aware of it all or most of it and stable enough to have a conversation with the other person. When it's done at the wrong time, communication may break down and it could intensify the situation. So when reflecting back on a friendship, connection around a close individual, if not a relationship, and there's an invisible barrier and it's overcome, breaking through each ceiling to get to the pinnacle, to make progress under one's own terms and with stability, but then reaching a drop unexpectedly because the self-defense mechanisms have lowered, the intrusive dark thoughts and the untreated troubles from the past have leaked over, and it could be a night and day difference from going to sleep and waking up the next day feeling as a different person, or seeing someone in a different way but not quite knowing why. Some of those factors can link back to childhood trauma, in which, as said, if it's not treated or known of, can carry over the damage and the impact and the weight, and it can build, just like a PTSD episode when dealing with and reflecting on a singular traumatic event. A singular traumatic event could be the loss of someone, could be re-triggered and enhanced by a complex post-traumatic stress disorder event, such as mistreatment in a very bad way during childhood. Not losing someone, but losing a sense of yourself, but unaware at the time. Losing a level of innocence, losing a protective layer and barrier taken from you, losing a form of trust within some people you once looked up to and thought the world of. That level of trust can be broken at any point in life, but the earlier it happens in life, the harder it is to try and, get people's, not gain trust, but get trust and look up to people without the fear, without the confusion, without the cautiousness. No harm in being cautious, but if it's like that every single time, it's not fair for that person going through it. There's got to be something else going on. Of course, you could always say it's important for the other people present to establish a form of clarity and communication and basic natural respect, but sometimes that may not be enough for a complex situation. And without the communication, that complex situation may not be expressed or crossed over clearly. If the person struggling who's dealing with it isn't aware of it themselves, it can make it very invisible and quiet. If they don't know about it, how is the other person going to know about it? So sometimes it takes moments for the coin to drop when things do get bad or escalate. The person could question it themselves after all this time, trying to put up with it, trying to deal with it, trying to get through it, finally finding a new chapter, finally finding a correct person, and it still isn't quite functioning. Things aren't quite as they should be or as it was intended or planned. Something has gone wrong. Is it linked to the previous relationship? Is it linked back to a previous domestic situation of seeing a former person imprinted, envisioned in the new person, and there's blurred lines? Or could it link back to something much earlier on in life, which links from one event to another, like a rebound? When linking it back to that defining moment of possibly being scared or panicked and worried about the intense feelings and lows and concerns when around a genuine good person, not knowing what to do. A person could retreat or run away and actually go to an environment or hang around a group or a person that's actually bad for them, almost like a toxic situation, a drug, a poison. It's not good for them. But if that's what they're used to, if that's what they know, that's what they may resort to because it's more of a sense of familiarity. Bad people, bad environments, dangerous situations can be attractive, paradoxically, to a person that has been harmed by it in the past. If it's all they know, if it's something they're familiar with, those untreated thoughts and feelings can have a form of attachment and a bond in a way. And depending on how a person acts as well, the survivor sufferer, depending on how they've been treated previously, being blamed, then having to over apologize, being labeled as not worthy and being talked down to and disrespected and gaslighted and coercion, emotional manipulation and blackmail can get to a point where when they have been on the receiving end of so much badness that when they do escape and they can breathe and they find a good person, and when they're treated the right way they should have always been treated better, when they finally get it, they don't feel like they're worthy of it. They don't feel like they deserve it. So instead, they decide to play it down or step away or panic, run away, and then return back to a previous person or return back to a sense of familiarity, which is poor treatment by bad people. It can create a vicious cycle. And if it's something that they've been exposed to from childhood, bad treatment, but in terms of how it started, a form of safety, false sense of security, depending on the dynamics, love bombing, showing intense affection, maybe gifts, presents, or just compliments, saying all the right stuff to get them on your side emotionally, to open them up, to welcome them into an activity or a situation which is actually abnormal and not right, but convincing them and taking advantage and harming them when they least expect it. Like something like that. Something they may not be quite aware of or quite know, depending on the timeline. But something that could have happened the same way at a later point in life when they did get into a relationship with someone, and down the line it did become controlling, hurtful and painful, could have been daily, and behind closed doors they were exposed to it all. But did it happen immediately? You know, outsiders could say, if it's that bad, why did you not walk away? It's not that easy, is it? Others could say, why would you surround yourself with someone like that in the first place? If they're that bad, why would you do that? What does that say about you? Once again, it's not that simple, because most of the time, these controlling situations, these bad people won't act like that immediately. They may appear the complete opposite, quite outgoing, quite strong within reason, quite secure and safe, convincing visually, and how they talk, their tone of voice, sounding like they have it all together, including psychologically, promising hope, promising security and safety, promising everything, being kind, being nice, being thoughtful, doing activities together, hanging out, eating out, and so on. Seems all very nice and good, but it's like a level of grooming. Like when you get drug dealing and you get lured into it, it may not be forceful immediately where it's like, here's a package, deliver it now. It could be a person in a bad way, a vulnerable place, a bit naive, a bit lost, then they are put on a pathway to a better life, a better future, or at least that's what they're promised by someone else, given gifts, given rewards, positive reinforcement for certain actions and behavior, and keeping that up, building that bond, building that trust, building a secure attachment, but it's in a false sense of security. It's not genuine. And when the sufferer gets comfortable, especially if they've already dealt with previous stuff, whether they have dealt with it, aware of it or not, like childhood, you can see where it's going. How a person, for example, that's gone through childhood trauma, has experienced the side effects from it with time, but maybe not quite sure why or how to deal with it. And then they come across a person that appears good, nice, and at first it could trigger a sense of familiarity. They're used to that treatment, or they like that treatment, but they don't like the fakeness, and they certainly don't want the consequences if there are any. But when the consequences come around, it's already too late, because the viper has coiled and wrapped itself around. It's a slow constricting process. Be nice, be kind, be welcoming. The person sells themselves in such a good way, catches the attention of the sufferer, unknown to them at the time what's going to happen later. And along the way, there might be the odd blip. To the sufferer, could come across as a blip, a mistake, an accident. The other person could apologize, but deep down, they're testing the waters, seeing how far they can push the boundaries physically, mentally, without pushing the sufferer away, building that trust and rapport, getting closer to one another, reaching certain milestones and beyond, tying the knot and more to a point where it feels like that they are secure with you, and you know, well, not you, but the bad person knows that that sufferer is not going anywhere, isn't going anywhere, not going to escape, not going to leave. It kind of gives the green light for the bad person to lay the full force out on the unexpected, innocent person of a party. And when it happens, how the sufferer reacts, not as much resistance, there may be a level of acceptance. Partially, maybe because of the past childhood. What they were subjected to then is similar to now. How they were treated back then at first, and how it made them feel good at first before the negatives. They related to that one core memory, and that's what attracted them to a future controlling bad person who sold themselves in a positive way first, made the other person feel good, safe. And that's what an individual may want to feel: safe, secure, loved, remembered, cared for, and all of that. If it's genuine, that's all good. If it's not genuine, not good, but to them, they may not know the difference. If they're used to the past, or that's all they know, then the next time it happens, at the time, it might be all they know. When they get to a point where they realize that they are worth 1,000,000 times more, that they're deserving of 1,000,000 times more, and there's a level of personal respect for themselves, then they may push, they may run away, they may walk off when they gain the strength physically and mentally. That can break. Not always, but it can. But still the weight carries over with what damage has already been done. But as said, the fact how a childhood experience and the interactions with another individual and the process behind it can lead on to the survivor, sufferer, being in a similar place at a different time around another bad person, and forms of actions and behaviour, mistreatment being repeated, but not quite knowing or being aware of it because of the process and how it goes. It's not immediate, it's slow. You don't pick up on it the same way, you don't feel it the same way. Maybe to some, if they've been there, they've experienced it and more than once, and they've learned and they've gone to therapy, they may pick up on red flags, early warning signs. They may use Clare's Law and do a background check into someone down the line, and then they may be a bit more cautious and wary. But you can't expect people to be like that, like a surveillance camera 24/7, all times. There can be a point in learning, there can be a point in adapting, but there's no fixed time, and there's no high expectation of knowing that one thing leads to another. They can't work out everything. They're too busy surviving, they're too busy dealing with the troubles, and they're too busy struggling and suffering. They may not be They may not be able to look beyond those emotions and feelings. That's why it needs an external presence and force of people or someone to give that perspective within the right way. But that can happen later when things escalate and get worse. This is about reflecting back on how the different stages can link on from one event to another, how a previous event which led to a person developing PTSD, if unreported and not talked about earlier, there could have well been a form of PTSD or complex PTSD long before this previous PTSD event, if that makes sense. If a person had been in a controlling relationship and how they were treated or how it ended led to PTSD, an event, a singular one, or prolonged, crossing over, bordering with complex, it might not be their very first time dealing with that. Whilst they may have been diagnosed now, they could have been diagnosed with that when much younger if similar events or worse events or different events with higher importance or significance or similarities had happened earlier. But in the early days, if it wasn't reported or talked about or dealt with or hidden, forgotten, neglected, if therapy wasn't done, if diagnosing wasn't done, there would be no label, there would be no attachment, there would be no correlation or knowledge. But that hidden feeling deep within, that knows, that hidden feeling deep in the body knows in some way. But consciously being aware of the links and how it connects, all the dots may not be possible, but may become possible down the line. And it might take meeting the right person, the right individual, someone that is good for you and beyond, but at the wrong time, as in everything works and yet it doesn't at the same time because of all the needs and factors being met. Finally, time to breathe, but also inadvertently, finally time to face and deal with all of the demons in the darkness, which has either been forgotten about, suppressed, or not known of to begin with. What they thought, what they were once aware of may come back. Even more has come about now. Yes, it's a time of reflection and it's a time of dealing with it, but for a person going through all of that and how they could change in behavior or feel or cope and not quite know what to do, they may put themselves in a shell and retreat to protect themselves or an attempt to drown out all the noise to make it a little bit quieter and safer for themselves. But in doing so, they cut ties with good people around them. And down the line, it can make it harder for them to think, what next? Then it can lead to self-blame and shame and guilt that due to them struggling and suffering and retracting and freezing, they have ruined it for someone, they have hurt someone because of silence, or they feel that they've messed up big time and that was never their plan or intention. They feel it's game over. So it can lead to additional shame, guilt, and self-blame on top of everything that they're dealing with and previous. They may not be able to think this way or feel that way, but it's important to remind them if there was ever a line of communication to reassure that person or someone that it's not their fault, it's the trauma speaking and the actions and reactions by them isn't by them at heart, but it's the collateral damage and the darkness that's attached to them. It does not define them completely, but it's a moment, it's a defining time where it feels like there might be a loss of control, there's a loss of power, there is more steps back than more steps forwards. It's the mind, it's the body trying to cope and deal with it in the moment. And in the moment, what's done and how it's dealt with may feel right, but then down the line, at what cost? Isolation, freezing up. The longer it goes on for, the harder it is to come back. It might get to a point where there might be self-induced thoughts, almost like self-torture. That could stem back to a traumatic stage in the past where an opposing person instilled it in them that they deserve bad things, they don't deserve goodness, that it's always their fault. So that could leak back in to when they have finally isolated protected themselves, or at least that's what they tried to do. And maybe as a form of care, they're thinking as in they care about someone, they love someone so much that they will self-sacrifice their connection with them because they don't want their darkness to consume or poison the other person's light, the other person's innocence. They don't want to become something they were on the receiving end of in the past. They know what it's like to be treated a certain way. They don't want to put someone else through that. There are times in life where, like with bullying, a person could be bullied and then they become a bully to someone else, a negative food chain. And that can happen with trauma, that can happen with bad treatment. It's a chain reaction. But the people that don't go down that route and maybe more conscious or self-aware to some extent may not want to drag someone else down. So it's easier to cut ties, to freeze out, to back away, to take a step back for the sake of themselves and for the sake of the other person that in their eyes they think very highly of. But there could well be a chance that that other person has the stamina, has the capacity, has the understanding and the patience that they don't want to lose the other person. But if there's a breakdown in communication or there's distance, it's hard to get those thoughts across, to translate it. But the internal battles going on within can differ from person to person, of course. However, and with delayed effects and reactions too. Silence, withdrawal, avoidance, slight period of gaining back a level of control when just dealing with an overflowing feeling of concern and worry. Maybe that reinforcement yet again that trying to convince themselves that got too close to someone who was supposedly right and good for me, and this is how I feel now. Maybe they weren't the right person, or maybe it's not worth it. Whether they know truly or not at the time, that can make a difference. But if the walls have been lowered, the defense mechanisms have been lowered because another person has been so good and kind, and it's create a strong bond and connection that they can both breathe and function. But then that undealt with trauma and damage and darkness comes leaking over. They may convince themselves that this is what happens. Get too close to someone and then it means being hurt. Get too close and lower defenses, it means getting hurt, just like the past, and again and again and again. But this time round, it's different because it's not directly by the hands of the partner, the other one. It's because now it's finally facing the past, which has been postponed, held off, or forgotten, or not known of if it links back to the very early days, as said, with childhood. So the person's in a war and a battle, for and against debate of, is it worth it to feel this way? Feeling so good to feel so bad shortly after. It can be passing. It can be intense. It can last some time. And eventually, if dealt with, if managed, if being able to have support around, it can make everything a little bit better, and it may not happen again. It may not be as intense the next time round, if that makes sense. But a leap of faith is required at times. And sometimes one leap of faith can be too many for some. That's why there needs to be a level of communication. So some people may think it's not worth it and retreat for good. Some people may blame themselves and feel that they're not deserving of being forgiven after their silence, and they don't want to face the possible damage and pain that they've caused towards someone they think so highly of. So it's easier to just stay away and not bother again. For some, he may feel unsure. They just want to cut things as they are because the last thing that they knew of that person was a positive memory, and they want to hold that close to their heart and move on or back away. So they at least leave with a level of control and maintain it, and it wasn't taken or completely lost. They gained something out of it, a good memory, and they get to keep that. But as they retreat, is what happens next and where they may go. The past, history could repeat itself. by falling back into that cycle of meeting a bad person that isn't right for them, yet they connect and get closer to that bad person than they do with a good person. And that might not quite make sense, or it might seem a bit counterproductive, but it's what that sufferer survivor is familiar with. And sometimes familiarity, nostalgia can be overpowering and take over, leading that person back, enticing them, attracting them to bad stuff, depending on how it's been treated. You think a person could get clean from alcohol or substances, drugs, and then down the line, when things go wrong or things get difficult, they may fall back on it, or it'd be a crutch, a coping mechanism, or just something that they're very familiar with, something that remains a constant. Because humans may like routine patterns or forms of reassurance, consistency and frequency, sometimes people just want the negative dark truth because of it's consistent and it's clear and it's the truth, or it's just more frequent, which can bring in a false sense of stability. They may choose that over the unpredictability and the uncertainty of something that could be good but not guaranteed. Falling back into old ways, being around the wrong crowd of people, the wrong influences, the wrong friendship groups, the wrong relationships, being screwed over, being hurt and harmed over and over again, and it creates a constant, never-ending cycle. Some people may not return back to that because once they've had enough, they've had enough. But that in itself, considered as hyper-independence, neglecting everything, not reaching out for anything, not considering anyone else, putting themselves first, but in such a way where all the tension, the strain, the weight, the responsibilities all are on them, how they deal, how they act, how they react to everything in life, because they feel like they can't even consider anyone else. They can't look past their own thoughts because of how things have played out in life. It's easier and it's more simple to stay as one is. Easier to stay alone, so then they can't hurt anyone else. But that self-reflection and perspective needs to be questioned. Staying alone means you may not hurt anyone else, but during the isolation, you may be indirectly, unknowingly hurting your own self, denying your own self of happiness, and so on. There could be a possibility at one point where a person freezes, pushes away, feeling it's a form of self-protection, but deep down they may know or feel that it's not quite, but it's the only choice that they think they have or know of, what the brain is familiar with as a coping mechanism, as a form of self-protection, but it's not a true form of protection. It's more a denial of positives, a denial of good. But to say that to someone struggling could make them panic or think, so what am I supposed to do then? What can I do? Am I blamed for this as well? Am I blamed for that? And self-blame can really intensify. Whether a message can be reached out to someone or not, the general communication dialogue would be, your struggles are not your fault. What you've put up with over time is not your fault. You can't control who you meet. You can only control how you react to it, up to a certain point, of course. Because if there is unnatural influence or power dynamics and manipulation, that can take over, and a person may lose that ability or lose their voice and may get to a place where it is hard to react. It's not their fault. They can't control who they come across. They can't control who they meet. And when it comes to a point of where it feels like a personal loss of self-control, a person can only do what a person can only do and what they feel and think is right in the moment. And to them, respectfully, it could be the right thing to do. Long term, it may not be, but in the moment it is. And the brain is trying to protect itself, protect the person from any additional pain because of the past. That's understandable too. But there might be moments where isolation, freezing, running away, deep down, it's not wanted. It's not truly wanted within that person, but it's the PTSD talking. It's a symptom talking. A self-defense mechanism is doing the talking for them. It's not their heart talking. A person going quiet isn't their heart talking or reacting to the person that they look up to and think a lot about. An individual going silent or blocking or removing or disappearing off the face of this earth in different ways, even in person, changing routes, changing directions, changing numbers, changing identity, who knows how extreme it could be. Their heart isn't doing all that or directing it all. It will be their inner defense mechanisms and could be a form of autopilot mode. A person functioning or doing some stuff in some way doesn't mean to say that they're perfectly okay, and it's not always a clear indication or sign to say that they are just moving on in a cold way and they've completely neglected or forgotten a previous person. It's the trauma and the after effects of the trauma that's doing the talking. That's why it's important to separate the trauma within them and split it apart from the real version of them, which is still inside. You separate it down the middle when there is an episode, when there is a wobble, when there is a struggle, when there is a flashback, when there is that flooding effect after everything being perfect. It's about understanding that it's not really them that's talking, it's the damage, it's the trauma, it's the defense mechanisms responding upon what it feels is appropriate and right to do. And it might be more intensified by that feeling of desperately trying to gain back that control and self-worth, even if it isn't personal towards the good person, but a flashback to the past. Like, you could be in the same room as one another, and if they're having a flashback or a nightmare, and they're saying, get away from me, I don't want you, I don't like you, I don't love you. If the other person's in the same room hearing that or having some kind of weird conversation with that struggling individual could be talking like with their eyes closed, but maybe physically their eyes are open, but they're not talking to you. They're talking to someone from the past, whether that be a hallucination, whether it be an internal battle going on. And that good person who's supposedly having a conversation with the real them, blurred lines, confusion. The darkness and the bad words that they say, they're not talking to a person that they care about or look up to. They're talking to a past demon. They're talking to a past individual that has caused them such pain and struggle. And there might be back and forth arguments. It's not directed at the good person. It's not intended towards a good person. It's a separate thing. It's kind of like nothing personal. It's more of a not a you problem, a personal me problem, that type of thing, but under more complex situations. So when it's not in the same room and it's more distant and there is a big gap and there is a wide silence for days, for weeks, maybe months, whilst it may feel cold, it may feel neglect, it may feel like abandonment. To the person struggling, they feel like they never left, or they feel like they never intended on any of that for that particular reason. They're dealing with a lot and a lot of noise, and they may not be able to look past that, and they're too busy trying to maintain and cope with that to the point where they finally overcome it, or they cool off, they calm a little. They may come back round, but then to that realization of, so much time has passed by, what's the other person going to think of me? How are they going to cope? How are they going to react? Will there be intense questioning? I can't deal with that. Will they argue? I can't deal with arguments because it was bad enough in the past. That is like the final barrier and blockade. Like how they say, certain situations or medication or healing and stuff like that, before you truly heal, you have to maybe struggle or suffer the most. Before it gets good, it's got to get very bad first, and then it comes back round to the good in certain circumstances that could possibly apply here. So I guess, once again, the internal monologue or a separate message would come across as if you've fought this hard for this long and you've tried your best, and it's got to a point where it feels like things have collapsed. But all this time spent trying to grow, all this time trying to build a rapport with someone who's actually good for you, and maybe you genuinely feel it, to then be knocked off the edge by indirect past catching up and possible childhood impacts all coming into one, making the situation very intense and difficult, having to get through all that. Isn't that person who suffered deserving of peace finally, and not the portrayed peace of just distance and disconnect from everyone and everything, in which there can be suffering from that with time, possibly? It comes down ultimately to personal preferences. If an individual is a lone wolf, then they're a lone wolf. That might be who they really are by design, or what they choose to be, a choice. But what if the real choice is overshadowed by what the body or mind thinks it needs, but not what the heart really wants? Having to battle with one internal body part with another. One pulls in one direction, the other one pulls in another. It's a tug of war. And that tug of war can trigger that attachment and avoidant behavior, getting close to someone or some people who may be good. Then when it gets too real, or when things settle and become relaxed, if anything from the past leaks over, or there's any triggers of this feels too good to be true, or feeling not worthy or deserving of it, pushing away, pushing the person away, pulling the plug temporarily, on and off over time, which can be wearing for both parties, or permanently. Of course, to that individual struggling, they may not be able to think clearly or think of everything. That's understandable. But what good does it ultimately do for them? What good does it do for others about? It's not a matter of one functioning individual completely harming another. It's a person that may feel broken or may feel damaged, dealing with a lot, and indirectly it's being taken out on someone good, or indirectly it's the troubles are spilling out on someone else. And a person that may be conscious and wary of that may feel it's just best to not return because they don't want to poison the other person. But if things were good up to a certain point, then surely they can continue that way, providing there is trust and communication. Ultimately, for any of that to show and be clear, is consistency and depth. The challenges can be significantly harder if a previous traumatic event associated with a previous relationship reached many milestones. The more milestones reached in the past makes the current situation a mountain of a challenge, because it takes such time to get to the same point where you left off from the last time, of where it all went wrong. Is it worth climbing that ladder to reach that last known milestone, with the possibilities of it all collapsing from that very moment, like how it did from the past? That's where the self-reflection comes on in, as in, how is this person different to the previous? Check for the differences and the positives. And if it's a clear night and day difference, to go over it frequently, not as a form of brainwashing, not as a form of fake convincing, but genuine, perspective. Every situation and every person can be different from one another. But if a person who struggled with previous patterns, if it linked to childhood as well, of getting around the wrong crowds of people, being attracted to those that treat them just right and then treated badly afterwards, and it's a vicious cycle, it's all they know, and that's all they'll choose, or think that's what they deserve, or think that's all they can have. If they get to a point where they realise that they're deserving of more, they can have more, they can do more, and so on. And if they are lucky enough, or they might not feel it, but if they sense that they are or were in the presence of someone, and use that self-reflection and time to write down on paper, everything in here to write down on paper, to create a visual imprint and memory which challenges the past and focuses more in the present. Grounding effect. A person's voice in the moment more grounding. A certain sensation and frequency more grounding, bringing a sufferer back to real-time reality, waking them up or calming and easing them in different ways. It can apply on paper too. Releasing energy in excess within the body and mind and applying it to paper. Of course, people with PTSD, CPTSD can have brain fog, memory issues, struggles at times when put on the spot, the mind can go blank. But a moment of self-reflection to look back on a person you are with or once with or felt like you once with, if there's a level of isolation and it feels like everything's over, done for, they've moved on, they've forgotten, there may be a chance that if they thought so highly of you and the words that they expressed to you at some point, which likely still have meaning and value within oneself, they may still be present, the door may still be open within reason. But that self-reflection and that writing all the notes down at a steady pace on one's own terms and conditions eases the pressure. They're not put on the spot to question or to answer, give answers like how they were in the past. They write what they think and when they think, maybe about someone, and then compare it with a past human that was bad. Weigh it up. Who's good and who's not? Who's right for you and who isn't? And then if there's communication to break through that silence, to show it's not game over and there is still hope and it can still be possible, to slowly go at it with a steady pace or a more steadier pace, a more understanding pace to reach milestone, but little ones in between, little by little, bit by bit, to eventually surpass a big milestone and for it to keep on going and remain that way for as long as possible, which shows that it's not always bad. But that takes time. As said, the whole point of the childhood trauma is how it can link back round like a full circle at times, and how if untreated and unknown of, and when learned about and faced, because of that delayed effect on the period, can be more intensified and more complex to deal with, like an untreated infection wound on the body, more psychological. Of course, something from childhood can impact intimacy, so the physical aspect, not just the psychological. Struggles with like hugging or cuddling or shaking hands or holding hands or even a kiss, intimate or just innocent, even a friendly gesture can be hard to process or upset because it, to them, unknown could feel like an unwavering danger and a threat upon them, like an assault. But it's nothing personal. However, it's a sensory photograph from the past, bringing them back to reliving it all in the moment. So the defense kicks in and that push-pull dynamic takes place. So that's just like another aspect and a layer, the complexity of it from way back at the start and how it drags on. So wouldn't apply to everyone, but you know, if a person has gone through something during childhood and early teens, for example, it can have possible lasting effects with time if not dealt with within reason or properly. And there can be exceptions where even if it is dealt with or coped with in some way, if down the line more trauma takes place, PTSD comes on in and it's more diagnosed or officially noted, it can re-trigger the past as well. Like when you feel you've got on top of everything and it's managed and then something bad happens on top of what's already happened, it then opens up the wounds again and it crumbles, like it's still a bit fragile. A person recovering from being an alcoholic and then suddenly there's a traumatic event, the loss of someone, and that knocks them sideways, they fall back and then they may think, what's the point? And it's hard, and then use what they tried recovering from as a coping mechanism or a distraction, or just falling back to old ways because it's that sense of familiarity, all they know of, what they're used to, even if it's wrong for them. Something that's bad or wrong for someone they could still participate in if it's familiar to them and their body and mind. Something a person is unfamiliar with, uncharted territory, such as being treated the right way, being treated with respect and care and love, may be seen as something positive and good, but to them something bad or something that they're not deserving or worthy of. If they've never felt it before, then why are they getting it now? By the hands of someone else previous, or their own thoughts, self-convincing themselves that the way everything has gone up to now and all the badness is because there's a reason for it, and it might link back to themselves, and they blame themselves, and that can be influenced by bad people back then, blaming them, using them as a scapegoat, using the victim survivor as a scapegoat, and then the victim survivor internalizes it all and does blame themselves. So when good things happen, they don't feel like they deserve it, they're worthy of it, so they push it away, they avoid it, they see it as a threat when it's actually something that's supposed to be good, and then they return back to something more familiar to them, which is danger. That's what can create that effect, that loop at times, when some people may have not internalized it all, but the question, why is it always me? Why do I always attract, or why do I always come across the bad people, the nasty ones? Why am I always mistreated? It's not because you deserve it. It's not because you've done anything wrong. It's because of that indirect, unconscious, psychological influence with the past, a sense of familiarity, twisted familiarity, which brings about a false sense of stability. And if it's something that you know of and has become normal and ingrained within the mind, it's a pattern and routine that can be repeated, even if it's an unhealthy one. So it's about trying to break that cycle. And it's not easy. And sometimes it requires intervention, and other times it just involves the presence of other familiar faces around within reason. During that time where a person isolates, freezes, backs off, it can be hard both ways to communicate, and it can be hard for them to return back because they feel it's too long, too gone. But if something is meant to be, and it felt real, and it was real, then it may not be too late. That's all a person can remind themselves and consider, because maybe might be a certain percentage of bad people, but there'll still always be at least that 1% at least that may be good or should be good, and within reason, if not beyond. It's just the timing and the place, factors that may have taken place or may have not. So this video was just about giving the backstory behind how one thing can link to another with time. Consider it as maybe awareness, and hypothetically speaking, if anyone was in that situation, or if you know of someone in that situation, relaying some of these thoughts and perspectives could help bridge the gap if there is a line of contact, of course. With that all being said, if there are any questions or follow-ups, you can always drop a comment down below and I'll try and answer if I can, possibly. But hopefully this video wasn't too much, and you can rewatch the video whenever you want because it will always remain up and running. Hopefully, you enjoyed the video. If you want to share it so more people get to see it, if you know of someone and you share this video to them within reason, feel free to do so. And yeah, I'll see you next time, whatever that may be, and good night for now.